Morning, everybody. So good to see you all. Pray a blessing over you all right now. I pray that the presence of God is rich around you, that you feel and understand the sense of the presence of God, and that the sweet communion of the Holy Spirit be with you. I was here a few nights ago for Crossways, and thank you guys for all your hard work in Crossways. But it was hot that night, man, in here. So it's good to get a good breeze. I pray that you all are having a good morning. And I want to thank you all for going on this journey with me through the Psalms found in the Old Testament. It's been fun building out this summer mixtape with you. It's given me the opportunity to hear about the Psalms that you love and hear stories about the music you like and the musicians that mean something to you and what music means to you. And I love those conversations with you because it brings two of my favorite things together: story and song. Story and song are important. Both wonderful ways of gaining a greater understanding of who you are and about life. I think that's one of the reasons I like the music of Bill Withers. His story about music is so interesting. He's a guy who never had any formal music training, who was born with a stutter, a guy who spent his early career installing toilets in naval ships, who sang at Carnegie Hall, became a 3-time Grammy winner, and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with songs like Ain't No Sunshine When She's Gone and Lean on Me and Just the Two of Us. And much of his music was shaped by two things. He wrote songs that talked about the precarious nature of life. His songs told stories about when times get really rough. And many of his songs were characterized by repetition. He wouldn't shy away from singing a word or a phrase or a refrain over and over and over and over again. If he sang about how love enhanced the quality of his life, he'd sing, "It's a lovely day, lovely day, lovely day, lovely day." When Bill sang about how he knew he needed to distance himself from a toxic relationship, he would just sing over and over, I know, I need to leave her alone. When he sang about the need to care for one another in his song, Lean on Me, he just kept on singing, call me. When you need a hand, call me. Call me. When you need a friend, call me. Call me. The repetitive nature of these songs are like ancient chants to root in the listener's ears how much these life experiences meant to him and mean to us. Story and song are important, particularly as it relates to our faith in God. Because the truths about God and our relationship with God are just too deep for words. How do you describe in words a relationship with an undescribable God? How do you put in words a relationship with someone who gives our life so much significance? How do you make sense of a relationship that defines our identity and how we see the world? How do we communicate about a God who heals our wounds and forgives our sins and gives us life and lifts us up and gives us his Holy Spirit, who sacrificed everything to convince us of his unfailing love, who picks us up and puts us down in sure and steady spaces when everything around us seems to be falling apart? How do you communicate how much God means to you? It's through stories, song. And in Psalm 107, we get both. Psalm 107 is a song about our story with God. It's a song where music and story come together. I'll read it again. It's long, but bear with me. It's just so good. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. Those he redeemed from the hand of the foe, those he gathered from the land, from the east, the west, from the north and south. Some wander in desert wastelands, finding their way to a city where they could settle. They were hungry and thirsty, and their lives ebbed away. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way to a city where they could settle. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind, for he satisfies their thirst and fills their hunger with good things. Some sat in darkness, in utter darkness, prisoners suffering in their iron chains, because they rebelled against God's command and despised the plans of the Most High. So he subjected them to bitter labor. They stumbled and there was no one to help. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He brought them out of the darkness, the utter darkness, and broke away their chains. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind, for he breaks down gates of bronze and cuts through bars of iron. Now, some became fools through their rebellious ways and suffered affliction because of their iniquity. They loathed all food and drew near the gates of death. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He sent out his word and healed them. He rescued them from the grave. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. Let them sacrifice thanks offerings and tell of the works with songs of joy. Now, some went out on the sea in ships. They were merchants on the high waters. They saw the works of the Lord, his wonderful deeds in the deep. For he spoke and stirred up a tempest that lifted high the waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down in the depths. In their peril, their courage melted away. They reeled and staggered like drunkards. They were at their wits' end. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. They were glad when it grew calm, and he guided them to the desired haven. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. Let them extol him in the assembly of the people and praise him in the council of elders. Family, they're just some stories that have to be told. It's important for us to bring some awareness to when and where God showed up in our lives, to know that story, to step back and kind of take an assessment of the scope and the breadth and the theme of our stories with God. And it doesn't matter if it's not dramatic. Please, whatever you do, please do not downplay your story of faith if it doesn't sound like some epic TV movie. Because a real viable story of faith is God consistently being at your side as you grew up, and you committing your life to Christ in baptism because it just seemed like the most reasonable thing to do. Because here's the thing, regardless if God pulled you out of the deepest, darkest pit of depravity, or whether God has been a consistent companion, gently leading you to where you are now, all of our stories lead us to answering the question, who is God to you? Who is God to you? I don't know that we give that enough thought. I was mentoring a church planter from New York this week, and he said anytime he asks that question of anybody, who is God to you, usually their answer is, I don't know, or Father. He said, and he really didn't think that they'd spend all that much time thinking about what it meant for God to be their Father. Who is God to you? And I'm not just talking about an academic understanding of the various attributes of God, while that's vitally important to know. I'm not just talking about your clarified and codified systematic theology that you figured out, while that's important to know. But none of that is important if you can't make sense of your intimate engagement with God in the context of your own life. Who is God to you in your life today? To think through this story gets to the down and dirty stuff of life, all the highs and the lows and your faith and your doubts. It determines where you've been and where you'll go. It's just some stories that have to be told. This is why the songwriter hits us with this immediately. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell your story. There's a story that needs to be told of a grateful person and an overly generous God. A generous God who gathers scattered people and brings them to a place of real stability. But to call a place that God brings us stable is a gross understatement. Because God brings us to a place where you encounter something greater than equity and justice. It's a place where God leads us, where we get a chance to meet God's favor. There's a place where we find something better than well-being. It's a place where we receive God's shalom, God's richest peace. There's even a place where we encounter something better than compassion. Is there anything better than compassion? Yes, there is. It is a place where we encounter God's hesed. Some of your translations in verse 1 call it love, or some of your translations say loving kindness. What they're trying to communicate is this Hebrew word hesed. Something beyond compassion. Hesed is faithful covenant love. Love that never strays. Love that's willing to make vows, a love that's willing to keep vows, a love that never ends, that always endures. And to be in a relationship with the God of Psalm 107 is to be in a relationship with a being willing to gather you up wherever you found yourself in your life and take you to a place, invite you to a spiritual place where you encounter faithful covenant love. And the command is this: if God has ever gathered you, if God has ever claimed you, if God has ever redeemed you, tell your story. This psalm is about our God who can meet you wherever you may find yourself. And to make that clear, the psalm writer lets us know in verse 1, this is a story about a God who gathers people from east to west and north and south. But it's even more interesting when a more literal translation is from east to west to north and the sea. And the reason the songwriter says this is because he begins to tell four stories that take place in all four of those locations. A story from the east and one from the west, one from the north and one from the sea. Four ancient stories that seem to be looking at our lives currently. Now, we don't have time to go through all of them, but even if I go through them really quick, I'm sure you'll find one of these stories resonates in your life. Mainly because the first one talks about meeting God in places of instability. I think we kind of get instability these days, don't we? As a matter of fact, the World Health Organization recently reported there's been a growing sense of mental and emotional instability around the world. Their research suggests that there's been a 25% spike in worry, unease, and anxiety over the last 3 years, and it's our young people are getting hit the worst. I think we get stories of instability. The songwriter pictures instability as wandering in a desert, finding no place to settle. I know what that feels like. In the east of Palestine, there's this vast desert that is separated from the eastern side of the Fertile Crescent. And the word we translate as wandering is a word people who traveled in desert caravans used when the well-worn trail that got them to the fertile spaces just seems to disappear. By no fault of their own. They just get lost. And as they travel, all of their resources get depleted to the point where they're left with hunger and thirst, to the point that their very souls, their inner beings, verse 5 says, just wastes away. I know some of you all have been there, at the point of so much instability that every option you have has been depleted. In this first story, there's so much the wanderers can't do. They can't find their way, they can't eat, they can't drink, but the one thing they can do is pray. And for the first time, we hear one of these reoccurring phrases found in the psalm, which says, then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way to a city where they could finally settle. And if you've been there, that's a story that needs to be told. But if you aren't familiar, there's another story. A story set in the East, in the West. See, in the past, people believed the West was a place of darkness because that's where the sun went to die until it was reborn the next day. The West was a place of darkness. And the psalm writer tells a story of the kinds of darkness that comes from being imprisoned by our bad choices. The first story was about a crisis that comes from life circumstances, but the second story is about a crisis that comes from our own bad choices. And if you've ever been there, you know how that darkness feels. But in a masterful turn, the songwriter says, while in prison, you might not be free, you might not be able to move, but that does not prevent you from prayer. And the reoccurring chorus cuts through the darkness. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He brought them out of darkness, the utter darkness, and broke away their chains. That's a story worth telling. A story about a God who breaks chains associated with our bad choices. And verse 16 pictures it as a story where God breaks down doors and cuts through bars, breaks down the doors of my own disobedience, cutting through the bars of my poor choices. Do you ever, that's a story worth telling. Do you have a story about a time that God broke down the doors of your thoughtlessness or your hard-heartedness, the times you refused to listen and the consequences seem like it locked you down and shut you down? But here's the good news of the morning. Ours is a God who breaks down doors and tears down bars. Amen. That's a story worth telling. But if you aren't familiar with that, is a third story. In ancient Palestine, when the Assyrian army would come, they would always come from the north. When Babylon, they would come from the north. And through countless attacks, these ancient people looked at the north as a place of pain, of dread, of insecurity. So the third story in the song sings about sickness that felt like that kind of attack from the north, an attack of sickness that came from unwise choices. Just like the preceding story was caused by bad decisions, the cause here is unwise decision-making. Verse 17 calls it foolishness. Now, I know this comes out of left field, but I was trying to think about a relatable story about some unwise choice that would make you sick. And you know what I came up with is, I think the worst choice to make is participating in competitive eating competitions. You know, like when they go and engorge themselves with abusive amounts of hot dogs and ribs and chicken wings. I looked it up. They actually have a league, the MLE, right? The major league eating. What does it say about our society when people locally and abroad are starving and that we celebrate a competition where people engorge themselves with so much food as quickly as they can in order to win a prize? It's crazy. I came up with it, but I thought what an apt description of the way our lives are sometimes. Unwise decisions that make us sick. Whether literal or metaphoric, we engorge ourselves with food or social media or stress or intolerance as if there's some sort of prize to win. But then the repetitive chorus returns in verse 19. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble and he saved them from their distress. He sent out his word and healed them. Isn't that rich? He sent out his word and healed them. Here's more good news of the morning. God is never so distant that our cries can't be heard, or so far away that by just one word from God, we can't be healed. It's a story worth telling. The last story is of Psalm 107 is set in the ocean about a traveler at sea, and tells the story about how we can get tossed about in life to the point where everything we thought we knew becomes useless. And the songwriter goes into so much detail, you can almost feel the rising and the falling of the vessel at sea. Verse 25 and 26 describes a tempest that lifts high the waves, waves that mount all the way up to the heavens and crash down to the depths, until verse 27 says they find themselves at their wits' end. A more literal translation, and all of their wisdom was swallowed up. Sometimes, by no fault of our own, you can find yourself in a place where all your expertise and mastery means nothing. And the only viable option you have is prayer. And then the reoccurring chorus cuts through the storm. When they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, he brought them out of their distress. Psalm 107 provides a model of how to handle these moments we find ourselves in rough times and rough places in our life. Through each of these four stories, we see someone recognize the situation that they found themselves in. They cry out to the Lord, being willing to articulate what their needs are. They accept the deliverance of the Lord, and afterwards are willing to tell their story as an act of praise. The psalm gives us an accurate description of what life can be like sometimes. The way the stories are ordered, you got these two in the middle about dealing with consequences of bad or unwise choices, and they're bookended by two stories about dealing with the consequences of life, circumstances, meaning what we're wrestling with in this life is not only the internal choices, but the exterior consequences. And God is willing to meet us in both of them. But what I really love about the psalm is that there seems to be a figure lingering around the borders of all four of these stories. Yeah, there's a person who finds themselves in peril either by poor choices or random circumstance, but all four of these stories shine a light on another figure and another story, and it's the figure and story of Jesus Christ, who gathers people from their wandering, who moves them through locked doors and brings freedom to the captive, who heals sickness and affliction by just saying a word. The story of Jesus who rebukes the wind and says to the sea, "Peace, be still." All four of these stories are stories we see in the life of Jesus. And this is why your story is so important. Because it is through your story that others get a chance to see Christ. The psalm ends with a word of advice, and the advice is this: the upright see and rejoice, but all the wicked shut their mouths. Let the one who is wise heed these things and ponder the loving deeds of the Lord. Who is God to you? Where's God shown up for you? Where has God brought you from, and where is God bringing you to? It's good to ponder those questions because it's a story worth telling. And let me say this, if your story is not worth telling, what are you doing? We can do something about that right now because there is a God who created everything, who is the word that holds all things together and incarnated themselves in this place with humanity and has invited everybody into deep intimacy and says, would you immerse yourself in me? Would you immerse yourself in a new way of thinking? Will you immerse yourself in a new way of being? Would you immerse yourself in a kingdom where you are beloved, where you can learn of my ways, where you can walk in my path, where you can show up like me for a dying world in desperate need of life? If that's not your story, what you waiting for? I told those kids on Friday, I don't know if you heard, but like life ain't getting no much better out there than here. In the community of Jesus Christ, we can be transformed so we can transform this world. And I don't know about you, but I think that's a story worth telling. Amen. Amen. God bless you.